and suggesting this topic, which of course is interesting: mediation versus peace building. So only thing now, Rosalia, maybe you don't know, things don't start with you, they start with the conference. So you have to tell us about the conference. That's how it starts.
I have to tell you about the
Yes. Yes.
about the. I'm sorry, I
Con-
didn't hear.
about the conference. What is the conference all about? What is it? What does it mean to you? What have you watched something there? So that's what you have to talk about.
Oh, about the conference in general, the World Mediators
Yeah.
Conference.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Well, what does it mean to me? From I haven't. I have to be honest. I haven't heard everyone. I haven't had the time, but I would love to. I'm going to take the time to start listening to. I saw a lot of the subjects that were presented by on your list, and I think it's a wonderful conference. You're basically touching the spectrum of different issues in mediation. And what I really like is the fact that obviously it's you have mediators from all over the world, you have different perspectives, but at the same time, there's a commonality, there's a theme. Even though we might be from the four corners of the globe, I notice that there's a lot of the issues that are coming up are similar, are repetitive in the sense that we have to focus on mediation. We really there's a lot of work to be done. Um, I'm happy that you're having this conference because it's very enlightening. It's wide though. I have to say the subject matter is it touches every aspect of mediation, from international mediation to, as you just had, family mediation. And what I like is that you have practitioners, not only people that are theoretical, not only academics, but practitioners. So you have the different the viewpoints that are coming together. I think what should come out of this is some kind of written document, something publicized eventually. It's just a question of coordinating, finding the time. But the subject matter is very rich, so I'm very happy and I'm honored to be invited to be part of it.
Thank you, Rosalia, for being part of it. And I think what you said, of course, sounds so nice that all this is happening. I'll tell you about the fact about writing. There is someone who I'm working with to do that. So to put it together, we're going to do that. It'll take its time. That's not a problem. So basically 18th May to 30th June. So 30th June is coming up, Rosalia. So you have to be on the last day for learnings and key takeaways. That's on the 30th. And so, of course, Ken Cloke's birthday we started on. And that was really nice of him to spend his birthday with us. And then that's going to be World Mediators Day. So next year, again, 18th May, World Mediators Conference. And we'll see you there also, Rosalia. So, but I'll tell you one topic that got left out, which I thought should have been there, was on the technology and mediation.
Yes.
On where is artificial intelligence and machine learning going, and that part of it, online mediation, that aspect of course, that we kind of touched earlier in another session, but that part of it that hasn't been too much on that, and nothing on that. So that's something got missed
Well,
out.
there's there hasn't been anything. You haven't had speakers on it, but I can tell you that there's a lot of work that's being done on that in the universities, and I know that here in Montreal, in the law, one of the law faculties at Université de Montréal, they have a whole unit that's dedicated to that. They have experts, they have conferences, although most of them are in French because it's a Francophone university, but they have experts from all over the world that come in, and they have a chair, a research chair. So you might want to you might want to go on their website. It'll give you an idea, and maybe from there you can pull some speakers in, because there are researchers, there are experts that are working on in that area here in Canada, but also worldwide, and they are in contact with other mediators worldwide. And I remember I keep seeing stuff also on LinkedIn on AI. It's not a subject that I'm that well versed in, but I know it's extremely important, and it's evolving. And from what one of the things that I did read and hear is that there has to be legislation. And I think I have to mention, by the way, UNCTAD trial started yesterday, the General Assembly. Part of that, I was supposed to be in New York right now, but I'm participating. I'm participating at a distance using technology, but that's one of their priorities. I know that's. I think they're going to have to draft some uniform legislation because it is a concern. So yeah, that would be a great subject. Maybe you could have one whole theme just
exactly.
on AI.
Yeah, I think we'll do that.
You
I
know?
think that'd be best. But Rosalia, you'll have to tell us about yourself, and then we'll move to the topic.
About myself, what is there to say? There's
lots. We've had a long conversation in conversation with the beautiful mind. So there's lots to talk about. If you want a longer version, go there. A shorter version, Rosalia is going to tell us right now.
A short version. Who am I? I'm Canadian. I was born here in Montreal. My background is in law, international law, and in international politics. I moved from legal practice into mediation. How many years ago? Maybe 2000, and I started 2010. That's when I became an accredited mediator here in Canada. It was a natural. It seemed to be a natural process. Basically, it's like I said in my previous presentations. It's conducive to my character. I'm a civil servant with the Government of Canada. I'm a third party neutral. I do practice mediation. I'm very lucky to be doing this full time. It's my dream job, basically. It's hard work because I don't just do mediation. We do dialogue facilitation. There's also restorative justice. I'm not doing restorative justice yet. That'll come later. That's something I have to develop in my practice. But mediation is and facilitated dialogue is my specialty. Also conflict coaching. So in the Government of Canada, every department has informal conflict resolution practitioners. Every single ministry and agency has. It's embedded in law. So we're very lucky that it's become part of the norm. It's no longer just grassroots. It's really part of a work description, and we're specialists. You have to be accredited basically to be working in this area. So I'm very fortunate to be able to be doing this full time. I'm very happy. But it's challenging, I have to say, because you have to always give awareness. Like people don't know. People are starting to learn about mediation, but there's a lot of stuff that has to, I think there's a need for awareness globally, not only locally. People have to learn. They have to make a distinction with what mediation is, what negotiation is, and arbitration. It's I think there's got to be more training out there. So basically, that's my introduction.
Perfect. Of course, the introduction to the UN, that part of it is a long introduction, so we won't get into it. But somewhere it will help us in this discussion. But you can take it from here. So mediation versus peace building. Yeah.
Okay. The reason why this subject really stood out to me, mediation versus peace building, is because of my UN background. I was a legal officer at the UN. I did work in the Office of Legal Affairs, and I did see. I was there when they were moving towards. They at the time the Secretary General was Boutros Ghali, and then Kofi Annan came in. So I was in the transitional period, but Boutros Ghali started with his agenda for peace, and the focus was on peacekeeping at the time. Everybody knew most people know the United Nations for peacekeeping. But what they don't, and what I find is there's a confusion between mediation and peace building, because there's mediation, there's peacekeeping, and there's peace building. Okay, it's a process. It's not thing. And I find that there's a confusion out there, because when you're mediating, you're not necessarily peace building. You could be basically, mediation. There's a conflict. You send in USS. Obviously, the United Nations has mediators, that has trained mediation professionals. First, you have to open up a dialogue session. You have to do an assessment. Like how we're gonna, how you're gonna assess how we're gonna deal with this conflict. Do we send in an army of mediators? Do we send in a facilitator? Like, you first have to assess. Okay, so you start the dialogue going. And usually it's to try to get a ceasefire. For example, perfect example is the Ukraine-Russia conflict at the moment. Okay, right now there's no mediation that's going on. It's not ripe yet. They're trying to have, they're trying to set up dialogue sessions, or there's countries such as Turkey that have raised their hand. Italy also. Italy also, from what I read, has basically proposed some kind of peacemaking proposal, 6-point peacemaking proposal, but they're not there yet. Okay, because they first have to get the parties to the table, and that's the most difficult part. It has, people forget that it has to be conducive. You can't just, you don't go from mediating to peace building. It's like you're going from point A to point C. It's not the same thing. And even before you get to the mediation process, you have to start the dialogue. So I see peace building at the other end. Okay, mediation is after the initial stages. And then you have peacemaking, where you have an agreement. And usually the agreement could just be an agreement. It doesn't mean that the conflict is over. You could just agree to a ceasefire so that the parties can sit down and have a dialogue, a constructive dialogue session. And this could last months, years, and it could be on and off. The conflict could rise up again. And then you have to go back to square one to try to initiate the dialogue. So the peace building, I see that more at the end. So you have the dialogue, the mediation. Then you have the peacekeepers that have to go in to try to keep the peace, like keep the parties, maintain the peace on the ground. Okay, and while that's going on, peace building, what peace building entails, it's not just maintaining the dialogue, but it's also setting up all the structures that are necessary. For instance, humanitarian aid, for the people that are on the ground, the reintegration also of people that have left, of refugees. That's what I would call peace building. You're building the country back up, okay, from the grounds up, for whatever was destroyed. So I find that when the terms are used interchangeably as one, it doesn't give it justice. And there's a lot of stuff written on it. You can go on the internet. United Nations has a very good website. I'm looking at it right now from an international perspective. From the approach that I'm taking right now is more in international conflicts. But I noticed something in this profession. You have a lot of newbies that are coming in, and they're using these terms loosely. I'm a mediator. I'm a peace builder. Well, what do you define? Why do you define? My question to them would be, why do you define yourself as a peace builder? Can you explain that to me? I in my day-to-day work that I do, it's not international conflicts in the workplace. Okay, I don't consider myself a peace builder. I consider myself a facilitator I start the discussion. I have the first discussion with one of the parties, and to assess what the situation is, and then I realize, okay, they might need some coaching on how to deal with, let's say, a colleague to de-escalate a conflict. But I don't consider myself a peace builder there. You might have situations where you have to reintegrate people in the workforce, but I don't consider that peace building. It's a different process. So that's why, when I saw this subject, it sort of spoke to me, because I find that there's like I said, the terms are being used loosely, and I think we have to be mindful of how we we use a terminology in mediation to educate and give awareness. We have to also understand the differences in the processes and the intricacies, and you need to read on it. You also that comes with experience, with practice. I just find it mind-boggling when I see somebody that had just got their accreditation. This is a mediator. Oh, I'm a peace builder. Okay. Can you give me some examples of that? That would be my question, and that's, for me, honestly is a pet peeve, because of having worked at the UN and still being involved. I can't even begin to explain how the intricacies, the complexity of peace building. Peace building is not just one action. It's not just at the peace building stage. You might have sometimes some mediation, okay, but you have to keep in mind that if they're doing mediation at the peace building stage, it's because they already started a while back. Okay, they already started. They started that process. They started the dialogue. They started the facilitation, and they're just trying to probably iron out some issues that were not ironed out at the time, or didn't come up at the time. And now that when you're setting up, when you're building a country back up, when you're dealing with issues like humanitarian aid and everything that's associated with that, there are probably mediators that have to go on the ground just to create dialogue, to continue the dialogue that was initiated before, at the initial stage.
Absolutely. This is exactly
Do you have
what.
any questions?
No, this is perfect. I think you kind of clarified it. Nothing really, actually, nothing more to say, because this is what was required. This clarification was required because very easily the words get used. I mean, peacebuilding is a major activity. There are lots which goes into it. There's a framework that you have to make, policies that you have to put in place, so much more that goes into it. So I think you've put it down very well. So that's it.
So what, is this session over?
Let's talk about something else.
Well, yeah. I don't know.
Seriously, what else? You've actually put it down exactly the way I would have wanted anyone to hear this, because this is what was required. It's actually that simple. There is nothing more to it. And of course, look, in peace building, of course, you can talk about what goes into peace building, but that we don't really need to get into it right now. Here, it was really to make that differentiation very clear. That don't use them so loosely. Don't use the word so loosely. There is so much more which goes into it. Yep.
It's the same thing. For instance, Vikram, it's the same thing if you use other terminology. Let's say conflict coaching. Okay. Oh, I do conflict coaching, but yes, but are you trained for that? Do you know what that entails? There's a difference between dialogue. There's a difference between a mediation process. There's a difference coaching session. There's a difference between facilitation. I mean, look at the definitions. I mean, sometimes I can understand why there's a confusion, because some of the interactions, like in the process, they interlap. It's normal, okay? but there is a distinction, okay, and that has to be made. Like, for instance, even restorative justice. What is restorative justice? I'm still asking myself that question.
You have to
Okay,
tell us. Educate
I
us,
wouldn't
please. Now you'll
consider
educate
myself.
us. Now you
Pardon?
picked up a topic. Now you have to
Pardon?
educate us on restorative
No, but
justice now.
honestly, I still don't understand 100% what restorative justice is, what it entails. I'm honest. I'm being honest about it. I wouldn't call myself an expert in restorative justice. What do you mean by restorative justice? What does it entail? It's the same thing with peace building, okay? Because peace building, it's a big word. It's a huge word, okay? It's like war, okay? What does war entail? What's involved in the war? Let's go with that, okay? If you want to define peace building, what happens in a war, okay? The countries, the conflict escalates. The countries start when they start bombarding each other. What happens when you bombard? When bomb a place? People die. There's everything that's associated with that. There's people that leave. There's refugees. Uh, there's people that are, but there's at the same time there's people that are left behind because they can't leave. They're either elderly or whatever the circumstances are. What happens to those people? Okay, they're left behind. You need humanitarian aid. Okay, what does humanitarian aid entail? You have to send in food. You have to send, like you have to find shelter for them, and that's part of peace building. Okay, humanitarian aid is part of building. So it's all these huge concepts. Okay. So when somebody tells me, oh, I'm a mediator of a peace building, wow, you have a huge job. Honestly, I that's what really bothers me about that, how that term is being used loosely. Because like I said, there's a lot. Those are each term entails a lot of actions, a lot of processes. It's not just one process. It's not just, oh, I'm mediating, so now I'm peace. Because I resolved the conflict between the parties, they signed an agreement, I'm a peace builder.
Absolutely.
You may have contributed to the peace building. I'm not taking that away from you, to the peace building process, but there's a lot of other parties that are involved in there, you be part of the peace building process. That I accept, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are the peace builder.
Yeah. I think you're giving some examples. If you want, you can maybe give some more examples of what all goes into peace building, if you want to do
that. Peace building, I don't know. What are conflicts that look, for instance, let's go back to World War II. What happened in World War II? There was bombing all over Europe. Okay, so basically you had refugees that left. They went all over the world. They had to build back up. Okay, they had to rebuild the countries. They had to rebuild wherever was bombed. They had to rebuild. That's part of peace building. But before you do that, you go in. You have to clean up. The troops go in. They have to demilitarize the place. They have to demine. There's demining. There's aspects that you have to take care of, the infrastructure, and then there's the humanitarian aspects. You have to take care of the people that are left behind, the people that are returning, the reintegration of the civilians. Then you have to rebuild. You're rebuilding a country from scratch, practically. You have to rebuild the infrastructure, government services, the services to the public, basic services, their basic needs. You have to provide food, shelter. It's basically Maslow's basic, your basic needs. That's part of peace building. So you're from the ground up, basically. You're coming out of a conflict, or sometimes you're still in a conflict. Okay, you're maintaining it. So you have the peacekeepers that are there. They're trying to keep the peace. They're trying to keep the parties apart. They might have mandates. Also to go pick up unauthorized weapons from civilians that have been that were fighting in the front lines and or defending themselves or whatnot, and they have to maintain that, but at the same time they have to keep the civilian population. Um, they have to keep the civilian population um, safe, and they have to be able to, enable the civilian population to go and tap into the resources that are being reestablished. Let's say be able to get their daily whatever they need, food, shelter, they have to create safe passages. What is a safe passage? A safe passage is an area where the civilians can basically walk, move, and not get bombed while they're going about their day-to-day lives. And that they have to that has to be negotiated, and that's at a different level.
I think, yeah. I think what
between that's during they have this is at the level that's at a higher level. In fact, with the situation that's going on now with the Ukraine and Russia, I think they've been attempting to do this for quite a while now. It's how many months has this war been raging? It's over 3 months.
Yep.
And they still haven't been able. They've negotiated safe passages, but they haven't always been respected by some of the parties. Sometimes the civilians are walking beef or to go to on and they get bombed. I mean, they're disrespecting the peace agreement or whatever agreement they came up with. Okay, so that's part of the peace. That's part of the peace building process. Okay, so when that's not being respected, you'll have somebody that's going to come in and to create that dialogue. And he's trained as a mediator. Okay, so yes, they use mediation skills, but they're not. It doesn't mean because you're a mediator, you're a peace builder. That's what I was trying to. That's my whole point.
I think what we can do is also, I think, also talk about the fact that one is the mediation itself and the role of mediators in maybe facilitating dialogues and all in the peace building process. So they have that role to play. So that part could also be discussed maybe.
Well, the role of the mediator obviously is a third party neutral. Okay? So the mediator does have an important role when it's called in the dialogue session because he or she is a third party neutral. So they obviously they have to create that safe space. They have to create that dialogue, non-judgmental, and they'll use the techniques that mediators trained for. They could sometimes they have to have one-on-one discussions, conversations with the parties individually because they're not ready to face each other at the table. Okay, so they could have what you call caucusing, so they could do shuttle diplomacy also if they're well versed in that. So they'll basically meet with one party and then meet with the other party, and if they have to relay messages, they will be the messengers, and they will use their mediation techniques. Obviously, they will be the third party neutral. They're obviously they're not going to be judgmental. They're whatever. They will only relate what the party enables them to relate. They will use their mediation skills, that's for sure. Okay, but combined also with their skills in dialogue and facilitation and even conflict coaching. They could also be coaching them, preparing the parties to face each other, and how to enable them to have a dialogue session at the table together. So usually not one mediator. It's not it's not one-on-one the way you would be doing it at a small scale. You would have a team. You would have a team of highly skilled mediators. You would have a lead, obviously, but the other mediators they could be working on research, country conditions, because they have to do the assessment also. They have to assess the situation. They could be working with different parties at the same time. because you might have multiple parties at the table. You don't only have the two major parties, but you have different stakeholders, and they have to coordinate all that. So the mediators have to be able to have discussion sessions one-on-one with the parties, and then they have to be able to coordinate so that they can get all the parties together. But they have to assess if the time is right, if the parties are ready to be sitting at the same table, and it could be a mediation, it could be a negotiation, it could be a facilitated session, it could be a dialogue, or they could just be there just to hear them out, just to let them vent, because sometimes that's what they need. They need to vent, they need to go back, they need to, because they need to regroup to the parties also, because they have their own strategies, and they also have whatever they have their political agendas that there's always political agendas. So the mediators they will have to navigate the different issues at the same time, and the different situations, and they have to coordinate themselves. It's a team usually. It's not just one mediator. You might hear of the lead mediator who would be an envoy that's been sent by the United Nations, or been identified by the parties. Could be a country, like a representative of a country, a statesman, but he's not working alone. That's what we need to realize. That statesperson is not working alone. It's impossible. It's an impossible task for one person. It's too huge. You have a team behind them that you don't see in the forefront, and a lot of them are they are trained mediators. Yes,
So there are lots that goes into it. That is what the main thing
it's
is.
complex. It's very complex. It's that's why, like I said, that's why I have an issue with, I'm a mediator, I'm a peace builder. I don't know. I would be too embarrassed to say I'm a peace builder. It requires a village, a team. You can't do it alone. Basically, it's teamwork. It's a lot of nation, but not only by not only with the representative of either that member state or the UN, but also among different stakeholders, which would be different countries. So that's why you have a lot of dialogue sessions and behind the scenes. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that you're not gonna hear about, and it's better. It's better that way. It has to be, the confidentiality issue always comes in, and that's primordial, because the parties don't want to reveal. They don't want to look like they're weakened, or they don't want to show their vulnerabilities, and rightfully so, because they don't want to cave in on. They have political agendas. That's a reality. So you have to deal with that, and that's where the mediators have to basically, they start unraveling. Okay, just trying to figure out what's the political agenda here, and how can we best deal. How can we bring the parties closer together, despite the political agendas that are at the table.
So that's the thing, Rosalia. I think you put it out so nicely that I don't really see anything more that needs to be clarified. But this conflict coaching, the thing that you spoke about, actually we had a discussion on ombuds and versus mediators. And in that discussion, this came up that ombuds to a certain extent are doing conflict coaching, because I was trying to bring that out, that, there is some part of it, some of them do that mediation part, but some is that conflict coaching part. So because if that has to be developed in other parts of the world, does it have to go as the format that is being used, say, in the US, or it has to be looked at differently? So we'll have more discussions on that.
Actually, the fact that you bring that up, it's very interesting, because we're dealing with that. We're with the exact same issue in the federal government, because the informal conflict resolution practitioners now, there's what's going on now is that setting up ombudsman's office. But normally on ombudsman, there's supposed to be a third party neutral. They're not supposed to be involved. If you look at the traditional definition of ombudsman, they're sort of like they're not supposed to be involved usually directly in conflict coaching. They would have the ombudsman that would be overseeing, and then maybe you might have mediators that are working for the ombudsman's office, okay, that are doing the conflict coaching. But the ombudsman as a third party neutral, I don't think that this is my opinion. I think it confuses their role as ombudsman if they're doing conflict coaching directly with the parties. I'm not. I think there's more. You're right. There should be discussion on that. That should be looked at. But personally, I'm not very favorable to an ombudsman doing conflict coaching.
Yeah, because
I'm fine with let's say you have an ombudsman office. You have an ombudsman that oversees, because they're supposed to be preparing, like, let's say, a neutral. They're supposed to be assessing the situation and preparing a report of some sort. But the actual work itself should be done by a practitioner. It should be a practitioner that should be on the ground doing the conflict coaching, because it confuses the role of ombudsman. I thought the ombudsman was supposed to just be overseeing, to define the roles and responsibilities. What are the roles and responsibilities of an ombudsman? That should be defined. There should be more. There should be more discussion.
Exactly.
Because sometimes they might step on they might be overextending their and they might be stepping on the toes of the work of the practitioner, the mediator.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. This discussion needs to be done, because look, thing is that if you take a word and you maybe put it in another part of the world, that process, that if it's, maybe say some country has used it, let's see whether it's worked, because I do see that it hasn't really, I don't think it's really taken off the way it should have taken off, because you need a person available to an organization, yes. But what happened here was, in a lot of countries I've seen, that the ombudsman actually became a person who was in some way, yes, trying to work to help settle something, but finally was an arbitrator. So we have, like in India, we have the banking ombudsman, the insurance ombudsman. They actually pass awards. So to say that that word itself then gets passed around in a totally different meaning, which is what
That's
I
right.
feel we need to either come out with another word, which then becomes something that you can explain. And for me, I think it's just a mediator. Why can't you just have an organizational mediator? Look, obviously you can have a panel, and if there is something where there can be steps. One is, say, a conflict coaching step, then a mediation step. Why try to put it all together?
Okay, I'll give you an example. Okay, the Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada right now, we're going through a Truth and Reconciliation, because of the residential schools, with the Indigenous communities. Okay.
Because Rosalie, I know about it, but you will have to educate other people who have not heard about it.
Okay, well, in Canada, and I think also in the United States, but I'm Canadian, so my more about the Canadian. I'm not an expert in it, but in Canada we had residential schools. Basically, what happened was in the Catholic and in also the Protestant, in the Christian faith. Okay, there were children from the reserves from an Indigenous origin that were taken away from the reserves. Okay, they were as young as this, and this goes back 100 years. And we had residential schools until 1990. Was it 1996 or 1989? I can't remember now. I don't remember the exact date. I'm not good with dates, but I mean, the last residential school closed not long ago. Okay, I think it was in the 1990s. I'm not sure. Early 90s, either late 80s, early 90s. Okay, but think of it, for over 100 years. Imagine they would go into the Indian reserves, okay, which is where indigenous, we have reserve where indigenous people live. They would take them away from their parents as early at the ages of even 3, 4 years old, even younger, because what they were doing was it was basically a genocide. They wanted to take away their culture. They didn't want them to speak the language, their original indigenous languages. We have different tribes, different nations, at least 6. Like I said, I'm not well versed. I'm just giving you the big picture. But this went on for over 100 years, and it's a very sad part of our history because these children were abused by the clergy, and a lot of them were abused sexually, physically, mentally, and many of them passed away. They died. They were buried in many of them in unmarked graves, and till today, they're still finding these unmarked graves on former sites of these residential schools. So because of this, I was privy, I was at a conference that was held here in Montreal a few years ago. He was a judge at the time, Mr. Sinclair, which is now a member of the Senate of Canada. He's Indigenous. He was a judge. He's one of the first Indigenous judges in Canada. He headed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Okay, so basically they interviewed a lot of the survivors, and let me tell you, the stories are not very easy to hear. It was quite difficult to hear the stories, the abuse. A lot of them are still alive today because they were children at the time. They were toddlers. Many of them lost, their siblings also. And so they have to live with this hurt, like with this big, huge wound. Okay, so the Canadian government has finally acknowledged that this has happened, and also the church. Now the church acknowledged it, and so they're first of all, when the Canadian government acknowledged it, there was the ombudsman, okay, which was the head of was the former judge was Mr. Sinclair, okay, so he acted as an ombudsman. What did he do? He prepared a report, okay, but he didn't mediate. How are you going to mediate? Okay, the clergy is dead, So I mean, they're dead, they're gone. This happened from 100 years till today. Okay, he's not going to go and mediate. So what was his role? What he did was he gathered information. He gathered all the, he tried to gather as much of the stories, the facts, and they prepared a report, which you can probably find online. If you look up Truth and Reconciliation, you'll find it for sure. I know it's been published on the Canadian website and on different websites, and you can read it, and you'll see that I find is more the role of an ombudsman, because you're taking the stories and you're assessing, you're basically you're fact finding, and then you prepare recommendations. But he doesn't do the mediation. Now the same thing happened for the Catholic Church. I could speak for the Catholic Church here in the diocese in the Quebec area, because that's where I am. I know that they had an ombudsman, an ombudsperson. It was actually a woman, a former judge, but she was not in the role of a judge as an ombudsman. What she did was she used her skill set as a judge to gather the information. That is, to interview the parties that were abused. And basically to prepare a report with recommendations. And that's where I see the role of the ombudsman. I don't see the role of the ombudsman necessarily mediating. You might have mediators that work in the ombudsman's office. You might have an office okay, that's being overseen by an ombudsman. But the ombudsman should be up here, should be neutral, should not be involved in the conflict. Okay, you might have mediators that are working in the ombudsman's office, and they're the ones that are on. If there are parties that need to that are in conflict that do need the mediation, they would intervene. So that's where I see the distinction. I think there needs to be more definition on the roles and responsibilities of what does the ombudsman do. There should be a definition. What is an ombudsman? What is their role? What responsibilities do they have? And what is the distinction between an ombudsman and a mediator that's on the ground? That's what I personally. There's a lot of work that has to be done. So if anybody wants to tackle that, that would be a great thesis subject. Research for a research chair also. To get involved in that.
Why that discussion was required is because sometimes what happens, you fall into that trap of words. So I'm saying, forget someone is using a certain word and there's a confusion around it. Let's leave the word for a moment. We're not stuck with a word, but can we see what is that kind of role that is required for that person in an organization? So what are the various things that this independent person or this, neutral is not a word these days I use, says independent person, or is it independent also, that impartial person? Let's just look at that. So what is the role of that person? What all can be put down? And then what are the parts to it which then require maybe different people? Like you're saying there's an office of the ombudsman and the various aspects to it. Similarly, an organization might not be able to have an office, a large office with a lot of people. So what are the various roles required? Where do you need an individual who's totally available? Where do you need a person coming in as when the need requires? So that is something which we need to discuss.
Well, you can outsource basically.
Yeah.
Basically, you have the ombudsman that would, prepare the report. I mean, they would do the assessment, but then you can outsource the actual practical aspect of it to consultant mediators that are, private mediators, basically. And I would consider that more of a third party neutral, like, more, because I find that if the ombudsman is directly involved in conflict coaching and mediating the conflict, I have an issue with, like, how neutral, how impartial are they? They're assessing, they're preparing their report, but you need a certain distance. I find, for me, I still don't. If you can justify it, go right ahead. But I think there's work to be done there. That has to be looked at. There definitely has to be some kind of definition, and there has to be a definition not only of what does the ombudsman, what is the ombudsman's role, what are his or her responsibilities, what is a mediator's role, what are his or her responsibilities. I know there's stuff out there, but there's got to be some kind of something more harmonized that has to come out. We need to be using the same language, basically. It's too dispersed at the moment.
I think what needs to be done, first of all, is what all is actually required, not what the role that was given to someone on certain, maybe in certain parts of the world or some organizations. Let's not look at that. Let's look at it, what is really required and what kind of person needs to be doing that, what all comes under that, what goes outside when you get other independent professionals into it. I think that's a whole discussion by itself, Rosalia. So, but on the peace building, I think you've given what you had to give, and it was quite nicely put down there. So maybe that aspect we can kind of conclude. If you want to give one closing kind of a remark or a statement, whatever.
A remark, statement? Not really. It's just comment. I think we have to be more responsible on how we use, how we label things, how we identify ourselves as mediators, as mediators, basically, because we're talking about the mediation profession. It's the World Conference on Mediation. I think we need to come to some kind of understanding. I'm glad that it, like I said earlier, I'm glad that you're speaking with mediators from all over the world, because there is a commonality, there's a trend, there's a theme, and I think we have to come together and define the profession a little more, come to some kind of understanding, and basically make people aware. We have to educate. I think there's a need for education, not only for people that don't do mediation, but also among mediators on how we, also practice our profession in a responsible way, also, and not confuse, because we tend to also, if we use terminology loosely, we will confuse the spectators out there that are, they have no idea what mediation is. Sometimes they confuse mediation with meditation. I know I hear this a lot.
Everyone has a story about this. Everyone has a story about this. The confusion between the two. Someone talks about it, how the first time they set up a center and people walked in with yoga mats. Someone has that story to give. So everyone has their meditation story.
That's right. Exactly. So we're not meditators or mediators. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. We're growing as a profession, which is wonderful. It's fantastic. The fact that we're having this discussion is already a plus, because a few years ago you wouldn't hear much about mediation. It's become sort of trendy.
No, but I think the most important thing that you spoke about was the aspect of not confusing the user, because I think with all these words that we throw around very casually, very loosely, the user has no idea. So it doesn't even know what we're talking about. And then I'm telling you, this is of course peace building and all that. Even that whole mediation, conciliation, confusion to the user. First of all, people in terms of mediation itself have different ways of going about explaining that. So I think we need to tell ourselves that what we're doing is actually disservice to mediation by confusing the people. They're going to
That's
anyone
right.
who's So I think we need to tell everyone, let's just now look at how a user would look at it, not how technical we think things are. And that's why I look, for me, Rosalia, you must have heard me say that so many times. What the Singapore Convention provides in relation to the definition, I think they've done the best thing there, best thing that could have been done. Nicely put there in very, very general terms. So at least for the user, it can't be better. And you've seen the definition, I'm sure. I will, if you want, I will show it to you again. I just love to put this out. So this is it. That's all mediation is. How difficult is it to explain to the user? But the moment you add anything to it and you keep talking about the models and the names and everything, you just take away from the process. And that's where we want people to use the process, not be looking at those technical things differently. So this is for me the best thing that could have happened. We didn't have this earlier.
Yeah.
We got this. I think we should use
Exactly.
this. Yeah, so nicely put there. So everything else goes out of the window. Let's not talk about it. Is this finally, someone third party helping you to resolve your dispute in an amicable manner and does not have the authority to impose a solution to you upon you? That's it. Nothing else to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. You can't impose a solution.
That's it. And everything else.
You're basically, you're just facilitating. But time has, as we say, it has to be right. The parties have to be ready. You can't impose. You're not a judge. You're not an arbitrator.
Yeah. And
that's
the best part
what you
is
have
that,
to remember.
And the best part is that, look, what happens is that one is imposing a solution, but then some people start saying, no, even if you suggest a solution, it is not mediation. And they start getting into those technical debates. So that's why I put this definition out. Whatever the word, however you do the process, as long as you fit into this, it's good enough. Let's let it be at this moment. Let's get users into it rather than us having these discussions. So that's something which I keep putting out. So Rosalia, thank you very much.
But what
Always
we have to remember, it's also Thank you, Vikram. But
You're saying
one
something. You're saying
final thing,
something. Yeah, yeah.
what we have to remember is every mediation is unique.
Yeah.
Every mediation is unique. So it's not a one-stop deal. Like you have to tailor. You have to tailor your language. You have to tailor the process to the needs of the parties. That's what you have to remember. That's the takeaway.
Yeah. And that's where the
That's
person
what it
comes in.
comes down to.
That's exactly where the mediator comes in. I mean, that's your way of handling the process, the way you think is the right way to handle it. That's up to you. I mean, the fact is that, first of all, let people connect to mediators. That connection is not being made because there are so many things that you're pushing into their mind that they don't even know what you're talking about. Sometimes someone is debating this, that technical word and that technical word, and the models and, I said, mediation, conciliation, peace building thrown in somewhere else. So too much happening on the user end. So thank you,
Exactly.
Rosalia. I think
Thank you, Vikram.
you actually did everything in 20 minutes. I just enjoy talking to you. So we went on. So, but you
Keep it
concluded it.
short, simple.
You had kept it nice and short and simple.
Keep it simple.
Exactly. So
Okay,
that,
thank you, Vikram. It's been a
yeah.
pleasure.